So we're gonna need some props, and they don't have to look like the ones I've got, but you need some things that are a little softer and fluffier. One of the things with, I think I forgot to say, welcome to Restorative Yoga. So one of the things about Restorative Yoga, what we're trying to do essentially is we're trying to let the poses be held so that we can relax into them really deeply. Most of our poses will be on the floor. We're gonna do a little bit of neck work. We'll get to that after we've done some shoulder stuff. We'll do that after we've done a couple of poses. So we're gonna start with a reclining butterfly, and you can do this without props, but if your body feels like it's not touching the ground, then you wanna put something soft anywhere that your body's, or something supportive at least, anywhere where the body's not touching the ground. So if the knees don't go all the way to the ground, then you would support the legs at the point where the thighs will allow you to touch the prop. So you can use blankets, you can use throw pillows, you can use yoga blocks, anything you've got, couch cushions, anything you've got that you can use to kind of support the body will be helpful. Now, I like to do an incline for restorative yoga. So I'm gonna take a pillow and put a block underneath it so that I have a little bit of an incline. And you can build that up with a couple of pillows of any sort. Just, you know, you may have to do a little bit of, like sometimes what I'll do is take a throw pillow or two and roll them up in a blanket so that I've got kind of a little bit of structure. It holds together a little bit better. So you can do it that way. And then I'm gonna use this blanket to support any part of my thigh that doesn't touch the ground, all right? So first things first is I'm gonna get myself lined up, and then the next bit is to figure out where the support needs to go. So I'm gonna get everything kind of in line, and then I'm gonna adjust myself a bit so that I've got my back supported in a way that feels okay. Make sure my elbows touch the ground, that's important. And then I have figured out, like, right there is the point where things are not touching the ground, so that's where I'm gonna put the support. It's just right at that top edge of my thigh. And then the thigh is being supported by the blanket since it won't touch the ground. And I just wanna make sure that my elbows can rest. And this allows, because everything's touching the floor, this allows my body to really let go. And then we stay a while. So we'll stay with this pose for a good long while, about 8 minutes. And you can hold this one longer than that, but that feels like a good amount. Sometimes that you have environmental distractions that won't let you relax. Can't imagine. Just do your best. Stop. Go play with your sister. this is why the poses take so long, is so that you can get over the hump of people not, tiny bird, people not wanting to leave you alone. Probably have the opposite problem if you have cats. They probably sit on your lap. Dogs might try to lick your face. We all have our trials and tribulations out here, trying to do yoga at home. Oh, goodness. So what we're doing is just kind of constantly relaxing and breathing, and just every now and then I kind of take a little kind of notice through the body scan, just kind of check in, are the muscles across my forehead and scalp relaxed, especially like from the temples, kind of around the eyes. Is that area relaxed? Is my jaw relaxed? I want a little bit of space between the teeth. Lips soft. Can my shoulders relax a little bit more? Because sometimes, like there's muscle tension, and as that starts to open, we can kind of adjust things. And then you settle back in. Make sure there's not any gripping around the shoulder, around the inner thigh. You could always add more support as you like to create that situation where the body can really let go. About halfway through here. Nice, deep, smooth breath going. Allow the body to sink in. Restorative yoga is really largely for the nervous system. So we're putting the body into some unusual shapes because of how it tugs on the tissue. The sensory nerves that go out through the fascia, just under the skin, are also impart the same neural pathways that are used for the parasympathetic nervous system, for that nervous system that helps us relax. Vast majority of that is handled by the vagus nerve, but to some degree the sensory nerves are there too. And so when we're allowing the body, the physical musculature of the body to relax, there's certain places like the face that are a little more sensitive, but when we do that, we're kind of reinforcing these neural pathways of relaxation. And so while we're hanging out with these poses, the mind, though, might be doing all of its normal antics, and especially if you are prone to sort of anxious mind states or future thinking, planning for things that aren't happening, that sort of jazz, then you can, kind of be a little bit vigilant about that. And when you catch yourself thinking about stuff that's going to happen in the future, just bringing yourself back to the present moment and anchor your attention in the breath. So then this practice becomes very meditative as well. And so we're in our last minute here. I'm just trying to stay rooted in the present moment for a minute. So we're going to come out of this pose very gently. Basically, when we leave a restorative yoga pose, we want to leave it as stay as relaxed as possible while we're moving, and then wind up in a relaxed position when we're going to get to the other side of it. So I'm going to really gently kind of bring my legs together. My hands were there to support if needed. And then I'm going to get this pillow out from underneath me by just being really lazy about it. Kind of roll into the side and scooping it out. And I'm going to keep handy a blanket and a pillow, because we're going to do a reclining twist. And I find sometimes that the reclining twist is helped by having some support under the legs. If I want it to be really spicy, like if I'm doing yin yoga, or if I'm doing another regular hatha style or vinyasa style, whatever style yoga I might be doing that's in the more active form, the spiciness isn't that big a deal, or it's maybe encouraged. But in this practice, we're trying to go for, again, the most relaxed we can be. So if there's a great big tug on the chest muscle that's causing some trouble for the arm or along the hip, we want to modify the pose with some props for that. So first thing I'm going to do is just going to windshield wiper my legs back and forth, and I kind of creep my feet out a little bit each time. So I took them from pretty close together to quite wide apart at this point. And you can find like a sweet spot if you have one spot that feels like it releases your hips a little better than the other, or it feels really nice around your sacrum. So I'm going to take my legs to the right first. It doesn't really matter which direction you go in, as long as it feels appropriate to you. I'm going to put a blanket down underneath my hip, try to smooth it out so that I can rest my legs on it. So I just have to kind of fiddle with the placement. And then I'm going to notice, yeah, I think I do. I'm going to put a pillow there so just my knee kind of leans onto a pillow, just a little bit. And then I can hook the top leg over the top of the pillow, and it has a place to land. And then my arm, I'm going to find a nice kind of relaxing place for the arms to go. A little more like a T, probably. I need a little bit more height here. Let's just see if we can do a diagonal. first part for me, the first part of every restorative pose is just fiddling with the props until it feels like I could settle in. And then once I get to the place where it feels like, oh yeah, okay, the body gets kind of heavy, that I know I'm in the right spot. And then we just pause for a bit. Now we'll stay here for a little bit less time. We're going to stay for about 4 minutes. So half the time, or so we were in the other pose. Now if you start to feel any numbness or tingling in your arm, you can adjust the arm position. You may also put a little bit more support under so the legs come back a little bit and there's not as much pull. So you just want to look for the one that feels the most sustainable to you. Come back to that nice deep breath and letting the body relax. Trying, do the little body scan. Check in, see if there's tension anywhere. If the light is brighter in your house and you can put a little scarf or a little eye pillow across your eyes to keep the eyes relaxed. And then as the pose kind of gently, the body accommodates the pose, you can change your positioning as you go. If things get uncomfortable or you realize that you can now draw a shoulder blade out where you couldn't before, that sort of thing. So that you can get more comfortable. That's the notion. Something under your head might be nice, that sort of thing. So you just kind of make those little adjustments and then stay present for the experience you're having. So the breath as it's unfurling and the body. And when you catch yourself thinking about stuff that's going to happen in the future, you just acknowledge, yep, I was thinking about the future or the past. It could be the past too, but who am I to deny that we might have some nostalgia for days gone by. But in any case, I have a lot of nostalgia. We can, when we catch ourselves in those places though, we can come back to the present. It's really more about, there's nothing wrong with having memories, there's nothing wrong with planning for the future. It's really a matter of the preponderance of our time. So if we spend the preponderance of our time thinking about the future and we're missing out on the present moment that we're in, that's a drag. If we spend the preponderance of our time thinking about the past and we're not present for the moment that we're in, then that's not good either. So trying to find a balance where we can have those little moments of back and forth but spend the vast majority of our time in the moment that we're actually in is the notion. Since this is really where our life is unfurling, is right here in this moment. We're going to stay for about another minute or so. So we're going to take a nice big breath. Come on back. Might have been longer than a minute. But sometimes when you're having fun, things happen. Realized I forgot to count the breaths after a while. I lost track. So a nice thing to do for a moment in between sides is just to give ourselves a little bit of a rinse. We're going to do a little shoulder work here, and then we'll do it again in between the other side. So we're going to work with this arm that was on the top. So since I went to my right, my left arm was the one that was on the top. So that's the one that I'm going to work with. I'm going to start with just grabbing hold of it somewhere. I like to grab the upper arm, and then I'm going to pull that arm across, and as I do that, I'm going to sort of let my legs go, just leaning a little bit against it, just a little to the left, just so it keeps me balanced. And then I'm going to try to pull my left shoulder blade down into the floor and into my back. So I'm trying to, my arm is trying to pull my shoulder blade across my body, and then the muscle underneath my shoulder blade, also known as the rotator cuff muscles, are trying to draw that shoulder blade deeper onto my back. And so this little resistance thing here is what we're up to. And you can lower the arm a little bit. This just is the place where I can actually work with my arm. It doesn't have to be up so high if you've got more room. Okay, so I'm trying to let myself get a little heavier. Take 2 more breaths. Okay, so I'm going to bring my legs back to the center. I'm going to let go of the arm. Ooh. Then we're going to keep working with this arm. So we're just rolling all the way to the side. I'm going to use my blanket as a head support. And we've been doing this a lot lately because I feel like we could probably all use a little bit of work for our shoulders now that we're on computers way more than we probably ought to be. So we're going to make a big arc like that over the head. And as we're doing that, we're reaching through the arm. The bottom half of this, you can either come straight across or you can finish the circle. You just want to be a little bit softer because there's an opportunity to pinch a nerve here. There's a lot of nerves that come out of the neck in this region, and just be kind to that return journey. So as we go over the head, we're stretching a little bit longer. The return journey a little bit softer, more guided by the body. Okay, so I'm going to do this twice more. Okay, so then I'm going to come all the way back and give that arm a little shake. And essentially I want to shake it so that it feels like the bones kind of rattle in the wrist and the fingers. Just let the shaking translate down the arm and into the shoulder joint. So a couple more breaths of that. We're just going to let that arm go. And then you can kind of, again, check it out. Like, is there a difference between my left shoulder, my right shoulder, the way my arm feels? Is the feeling that I'm left with pleasant or not? When it's not pleasant, we might modify a bit on the other side. Try it a little differently, see what happens. If it is pleasant, then I say do the same thing next time. But to start with, we're going to come into the twist. So I have put a little support down here for my hip, and I'm going to take my legs around again. So we're going to just fiddle with this pose until we find the point of relaxation, the point where the body lets everything sink into it. Find that, we just let go into it and just try to relax as best we can. And then we'll stay a while. just kind of check in with ourselves periodically. Taking nice, deep, smooth breaths. Coming back to the moment whenever we get a chance. Sometimes those little kind of environmental distractions of like hearing someone mowing the lawn or something, sometimes those kind of will give us a moment to catch ourselves, right? And so you can catch yourself when the bird song distracts you from your otherwise ruminating mind. And come on back to the present. So what would normally be a distraction for meditation, like paying attention to a sound, becomes kind of a friend, a little tool to use to bring yourself back in. Take a nice deep breath. We're going to bring ourselves back to the center, and again, we're just taking our time, being kind of gentle and kind about it. Before we go anywhere else, we're just going to pause. Give the hips a little release. You can pull your knees into your chest and give yourself a little back massage if you like that one better. And then grabbing the upper arm when you're ready. And kind of giving yourself that little bit of a tug. I'm going to lean my knees slightly in that direction just to keep myself balanced. And then let my shoulder blade try to find its way back down to the floor or into my upper back. Whatever. It might feel like it's doing one or the other. Take a nice big inhale, and then I'm going to let myself keep going into this sort of the way I was pulling my arm, essentially. So give myself some head support, and then I'm going to I have to make sure I'm not going to smack the furniture. Okay, so then we'll reach out through the arm as we bring it up and overhead, and then be kind through the bottom part. I'm going to do 2 more of these. And then I'm going to let it peel me back onto my back, and I'm going to give that arm a shake. I'm trying to get kind of rattly. Almost like the bones are rattling in the joints. Okay. And then letting that rest. So what happens next is that we're going to sit up. We're going to take our time doing it. So the idea in restorative yoga too is that as you're kind of moving yourself from one pose to the next, especially a shift in body position, just take your time and let your head kind of be the last thing that gets up to the top there. And since I'm already kind of rolling this direction, I'm going to go this way. And then I'll reorient. All right. So we're going to do a little bit of work for the neck, and then we're going to do a forward bend. So for the neck portion, you may want to sit up on the end of a blanket, because we're just going to sit cross-legged. And sitting up on the edge of a blanket is very helpful for, it just brings the pelvis up a little bit higher around in relationship to the knees, and it can be a little easier to sit cross-legged. So if that would be helpful to you, do it. I'm going to use my blanket in a different way in a bit, so I'm just going to pause here. But same notion, like whatever will work best for you. So I'm going to drop my chin, and then I'm going to roll the head up and over one side. And when I get to this point where I can feel that stretch, just memorize where that is, because we're going to come back to that guy. And then as you go forward, you might find that there's a little stretch right here in the back of the neck. And kind of memorize where that is. We're just going to go back and forth over this one shoulder. Notice if this shoulder tries to lift up to help, see if you can stay relaxed. Sometimes I find myself leaning in that direction, so just trying to stay balanced. Okay, so now as you roll the head back, we're going to find this stretch between the collarbone and the skull that goes right behind the jaw. So I'm going to reach my arm way out to the side here, kind of pull the collarbone that way, as I just let the head rest this direction. If it starts to feel too pinchy under here, lift the head just slightly so there's not as much of an angle. So we can get this kind of feeling of broadening right here through this muscle in the front. It feels really good. So, I'm a side sleeper, so everything here gets all crunchy. In the morning it feels nice. At some point during the early part of the day to release that. Okay, so now I'm going to take the head the other way. So what this muscle that connects my shoulder blade to the back of my skull here, I'm going to pull my shoulder blade down, still reaching with my arm, but just putting it in a slightly different position so I can access the shoulder blade quite nicely. And then just letting the head kind of gently fall forward. And again, just occasionally making sure I'm not doing anything crunchy with the other side or leaning into it. And these may or may not be intense. I feel the stretch, and it feels really good, but it doesn't feel like, like I'm trying, I don't know, it doesn't feel super duper intense. It's a small muscle. There's stuff that, like chair pose, for example, like makes your quads shake. It's not like that. It's a little bit less intense than that, but it still feels really nice. Okay, so I brought my arm back, and now I'm going to get my head kind of floated back, float my head back up. That's the way I'm going to say that. All right, so once the head is kind of a little more in neutral, then you can kind of check in with the shoulders. I like to do a little bit of movement up and down, back and forth, some little circles, and see how things went. Now, normally it feels like my right shoulder's higher than my left, and now it feels like my right shoulder's a little bit lower. So that feels good to me. It feels pleasant. I don't feel anything pinchy. So I'm going to do the other side basically the same way. I'm going to roll my head up and over the right side, and again, just double checking I'm not lifting with that right shoulder or pinching in any way. And just going back and forth through this little range of motion, letting my head kind of loll over one shoulder. And then I'm going to, now that I kind of know where the beginning of that stretch is, I'm going to go ahead and let myself find it again and hold it. So I'm taking my collarbone away from my skull as best I can without straining with the head. So I want most of the work to be done by my shoulder, and I want the head position to just be kind of lightly held. Okay, so now I'm going to go for the other position and let the head come forward a little bit until I feel that transition into the muscle that goes behind. I'm going to try to pull my shoulder blade down a little bit. And again, most of the action is being done by the shoulder and a little bit just the head kind of hanging out. Okay, so I'm going to bring my arm back to the center, and then I'm going to let my head float up. Move the shoulders. I feel like I could do that like once every hour. Sometimes it feels that good. All right, so we're going to take ourselves into a forward bend. Now I'm going to take my feet apart, but not as wide as I normally can. I'm kind of wanting this to be sort of somewhere in between the Paschimottanasana, which is when the legs are completely together, and the Upavista Konasana, which is when the legs are wide apart at an angle. So I want somewhere in the middle of that where it's soft, but I've got a little bit of room to put some props. So I'm going to put a support under my knees. So I tend to hyperextend at the knee. And so that's where I need the support. For some folks, when the legs go wider apart, the pelvis goes backwards. And so you will want to put the support underneath your hips so that you elevate your surface. It will help kind of tilt you forward into the shape. And then we're going to just build up as many pillows as is necessary, pillows and whatever else you've got, to just create a situation where we're sort of allowed, the pelvis leans forward, and then everything else is going to be supported, so that I have it's almost like I'm filling in all the space, right? I don't know exactly. An image comes to my mind, but I'm not sure it will be helpful. So I'll tell you what it is, but I don't know if it's going to be helpful. Like sometimes, you know, you like make a table out of a big slab of wood, and there's divots, and you know, there's places where the wood was missing, or you know, a knot or something. They'll fill that in with like a clear resin. That's the idea. So again, I don't know if that's a helpful thing, but we're using the props to fill in the space, so that whatever space, when I fold forward, I've got fillers here, so that I can rest the body into the fillers and see where the props need to go to make this just right. And I'm going to keep my legs relaxed. From time to time, I like to wiggle my toes, just to, you know, feels good. And you're certainly welcome to do things like that or to adjust the position, but mostly we're going to try to be still for about 7 minutes. Feels really sharp anywhere in the back, then I would suggest that you can, you might want to put in more support. You can even put a chair up next to you so you can lean into the seat of the chair. Anything that will give you that little bit of support is going to be useful. Make sure that you can breathe. I've got a little like hole right here for my nose to live in. Again, as with every pose, we are just taking some time to notice the breath, to keep coming back to the present whenever we find ourselves kind of drifting off to thinking about other stuff. time to time do a little scan through your body and just make sure that everything is as relaxed as it can be. Inside of our last minute here. Use that as kind of a marker to call yourself back to the present if your mind was wandering. Take a nice big breath. I've been coming all the way up. We're going to take our time transitioning here. I'm going to bring my legs together a little bit, then I'm going to lean back and bend my knees. Give everything a little bit of movement. My spine is going to want to stay in that shape for a second. So, taking a moment. You could put a blanket underneath your hip here. I'm on a fairly padded surface, So it generally doesn't bother me, but this little bony protrusion on the outer part of the thigh, the greater trochanter, can push into the floor with this next pose that we're going to do, which is a side bend on either side. And so if that is the case, then I would put something soft underneath the hip. I'm going to save my blanket for my neck because I've got carpet and a yoga mat here, so it's fairly padded. Now, the size of the pillow is largely going to depend on how wide your waist is. You can also use a folded blanket for this, or even a yoga block, but yoga blocks are really hard. I would go for like a throw pillow before I would do that, maybe a throw pillow and a blanket. But we're going to lay sideways over this. So essentially what I do is pull the bolster up close to my hip and then lean over it and put my rib cage on it. Okay, so once the rib cage is resting on a pillow, then you can adjust the hip so that it feels comfortable. And then this part of this where we're kind of falling over the edge, that's where we're going to figure out how much support we need. So you could use your arm for support if that, hold on, let me make sure that's visible. Your arm for support if that feels okay for your head and your shoulder. If that doesn't feel so hot, you can put a pillow or a yoga block or something like that in and let your arm rest out in front instead. So it really just depends on how it feels. If it's pinchy feeling, then I would definitely change it. So this is where the blanket comes in handy for me because I need just a tiny bit more support. So just putting that blanket between my head and my arm feels really nice. Now this arm can go right up over with its friend. I like to have this arm just kind of hang out with my hip, and I let the elbow fall backwards so there's still a little broadening across the chest. And then I like to let my top leg really go straight. Sometimes I'll straighten both legs, but definitely the top one, so that there's a sense of kind of drawing the outer hip into the stretch, and then my spine is bending around this pillow. So it's a supported side stretch, essentially, is the notion. So you can decide how you want to organize the shoulder, the legs, and if this just isn't going to work, if this pose is horrifying for whatever reason, just feels horrible, you can lay on your back and just bend yourself into a shape that looks like a banana from the top down, and that it will give you a similar impact. I find this really useful for releasing tension here in my lower back. I really like it for that. I'm a fan, but you want to be mindful of what your experience is. Now this guy is a shorter pose. Again, we're going to stay for about 3-4 minutes on each side. At this point, about 3 more minutes, but we'll do 4 minutes when we get to the other side. And take a nice big breath. I'm gonna let go with a really big. Now to get out of this, I'm gonna kind of reconfigure how I started. So I'm gonna bring my knees up, stick my legs out in front of me so that I have, essentially I'm just gonna push myself up to a seated position. So I'm gonna use my arms and just nice and slow, kind of let everything come back up. And then you can move around a little bit because essentially we're, gonna do the same thing. But right now, the spine is probably still feels like it's leaning in that direction. So we're just gonna give ourselves enough time for everything to kind of shift back. So when it feels like a good idea to kind of move your spine around a little bit, move the ribs, you can do that. And I've just set myself up so I can basically do the other side when I'm ready. So I usually give it at least a minute for things to settle and feel. Like, does everything feel like it's kind of settling back into place? And do I have permission to do the other side from my body? Because that's the only person in charge right now. Okay. Feels pretty good. So I'm going to start getting into this. And then if I feel some resistance, I'll pause for a second. Adjust the hip. Adjust the position of the head. And again, we're just kind of looking for this kind of sense of length along this one side. You can again decide how you want to position your arm within that context so that your shoulder's happy with you later. And for me, the right side is different than the left, so finding the exact right position for the right shoulder can be interesting. So we're going to sink in and settle for a bit. We're going to stay for about another minute here.
take a nice big breath. And then we're going to kind of slowly reconfigure so we can push ourselves upright. Now, we're going to take a moment and let this kind of settle, but we really only have one pose left to do, and the question you have to ask yourself is, which version do I want to do? So we have Shavasana, corpse pose left, or if you'd rather, you could do a legs up the wall, or legs over a chair, legs over the couch. So you could do a little mild inversion for your final pose, if you'd rather. So you just want to choose what you think is going to be best for you. So to do Shavasana generally, with restorative yoga, we do just a little bit of support. So I'm going to have a pillow underneath my legs, so my hip flexors relax. I'm going to have a blanket underneath my head, so I've got a little bit of support there for my head and my neck. So you just want to adjust your universe, your world, a little bit so that it's a little softer and more inviting. If you're going to do the legs up the wall, put a little like blanket under your hips so that there's a little soft support for your sacrum, or you might need a blanket under your head or shoulders as well. So you just make the world a little softer. Sometimes I wish I could do that for everybody every day, but we can at least do it here. So I'm going to allow myself to find kind of the place where my legs feel like they are at the right amount of support. Sometimes it's better under the knee a little bit. Sometimes it's better a little closer to the thigh. Usually for me a little higher up is better, but not every day. And then adjusting the head support so that it feels like I've got a nice little, like I've got a little lump on the back of my skull. So the nice thing about having the blanket there is that it sort of fills everything in. I don't feel like I'm riding on my little Neanderthal lump. I watched a PBS special once that said that if you had a lump on the back of your skull, it meant you had Neanderthal DNA. So I decided that that was absolutely must be true, because that would be the reason that I have trouble working my iPhone. But in any case, here we are with my lump supported by a blanket. You may not have these issues. And so once you've chosen your pose, then we just spend our last bit of time here just relaxing into it. We're going to stay a while. It could turn into a nap. So if it does, eventually the computer will do something else for you. So hopefully you'll be all right. So again, the whole point of this practice is to let the nervous system unwind. So if there's little things that you want to do, like bring your arms a little farther out or a little closer in to allow for that sense of your body really relaxing into the floor, do those things. Sometimes it's helpful to have a little eye pillow, or even like a tiny bit of support under the arms. I've been to classes where they give you little sandbags to put in your hands, like little bean bags, to let your palms relax out as completely as possible. That's really nice. just gonna notice the breath again. Big deep inhale and let go with a sigh. And then we could start kind of wiggling all the fingers and toes. Stretch them apart and wiggle them again. And then stretch them apart and wiggle them again. And then we can do wrist and ankles. Give yourself some big long stretchy. And then a back massage maybe. That feels really good. And then, when you're ready, and you can take your time here, there's no real rush, clearly. If we haven't gotten that message yet. We're not in a rush. So thank you so much for joining me for some restorative yoga this morning. We'll take a big breath together. Namaste.